Welcome back to another very exciting matchup between Hikaru Nakamura going up against Nodirbek Abdusattorov at the Team USA vs Team Uzbekistan show match in Miami, Florida. And so far Hikaru, he's having a very poor tournament, but let's see if he can strike back with the white pieces to win some points for his team. And Nodirbek is playing the triangle system. Both players are actually taking the time to laugh and smile because at the recent candidates tournament, Hikaru played this line against Yavakir Sindarov and famously went on to lose that game and started blaming his team. So some uncovered drama there. And now after an exchange of pawns in the center of the board, the position has transposed to a Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation. And Hikaru, he first starts by bringing his queen out to c2, trying to stop the bishop from developing to a very nice square, stopping the bishop from going to f5. But Nodirbek, he insists that I'm going to bring my bishop out to f5, so he plays g6 so that he can support the light squared bishop coming out. And now Hikaru starts with very normal development. h3 is a bit of a strange move actually, but maybe in the future trying to play g4 and make this bishop on f5 a target. Now after the bishop has come out, the queen has to slide away from the light square diagonal, and black should be very happy with how things have gone so far. Not only has he been able to win the fight for this light square diagonal, but also Nodirbek up a few seconds on the clock. So Hikaru, he's going to have to start speeding up a little bit in this middle game to catch up. And now after the move pawn to e3, perhaps Hikaru trying to rectify the situation. He's going to bring his bishop from f1 to d3, trade off the light square bishops, and reclaim some control in the center of the board. Nodirbek has taken the opportunity to lash out on the king side, playing the move pawn to h5, perhaps discouraging white from playing the move pawn to g4, attacking his light squared bishop. And now the most natural move, I think, is to bring this bishop from f1 out to d3, trying to regain some control in the center of the board. And after exchange of bishops, that's exactly what happens. Now Hikaru, he's going to have a very interesting choice in the future here. Will he castle queenside and try to take advantage of the fact that black is overextended on the king side? Or will he just play something like knight to f3, castle kingside, and play a very solid game? Meanwhile, Nodirbek, he's having a very difficult decision to make because bishop to g7, trying to play the most natural move, encountering the dark squared bishop, does run into bishop d6, which would keep the king cut off in the middle of the board. And if he goes something like bishop to e7, trying to avoid bishop d6, after castling kingside, well, the dark squares around the black king would be extremely weak. So very difficult decision for the Uzbeki Grandmaster. And while Nodirbek decides on where to play his dark square bishop, I just want to remind you that you want to support the channel, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. That would help out the algorithm a lot. Thank you. Nodirbek, he plays bishop to g7, allowing bishop to d6, and perhaps we could have a repetition here. Bishop to d6, bishop goes back to f8, and maybe Hikaru, he'll play bishop back to f4. And for Hikaru, maybe that's not such a bad result for his team. Nodirbek is one of the strongest players for Team Uzbekistan, and Hikaru having a poor tournament so far, this might be the very strategic decision that Hikaru should take. But Hikaru, it looks like he wants to keep playing. He plays knight to e2 instead of bishop d6, and now white has the very interesting choice of castling kingside or queenside. Or maybe before castling queenside, Hikaru, he could start with the pawn storm on the kingside. Maybe g4 is an option. But Hikaru, he chooses to play solid. And now in this Carlsbad structure, two plans that white has is to go for the minority attack. But Hikaru, it looks like he's going for plan number 2, rook a to d1, supporting the central pawn on d4. And now this indicates to me that Hikaru wants to play something like f3 and e4. But I'm not so sure if I'm appreciating this plan by Hikaru. He starts by centralizing the other rook, but after f3, the dark squares around the white king will be so weak. And Nodirbek, meanwhile, he is slowly pushing on the queen side. f3 is played by Hikaru. Now e4 is most likely to happen. But Nodirbek's position looks really good here. He has a lot of space on the queen side. The squares around the white king are so weak. And Hikaru, even if he gets his e4 move in, these pawns in the center of the board, they could become targets. And now after this move pawn to a3, this knight on b6 is headed to c4. And Hikaru will not have the move pawn to b3 to kick away this knight. I think the position looks very desperate for white, but Hikaru, he's going for any active counterplay he can find, which is in the center of the board. Now bishop back to c1 protects the b2 pawn, and after exchange in the center of the board, it looks like white has a very nice pawn center. These pawns on d4 and e4 beside each other, they look quite nice, but they are very, very big targets that black is going to start trying to rally up. Queen to b6, and now the other rook comes to d8, and look at the pressure against the d4 and e4 pawn. And this knight on f6, right now it's pressuring the pawn on e4, but also at some point it can move away and uncover the bishop on g7, which would add some more attackers onto the center of the board. Hikaru in big trouble here. c5 is also a very, very big threat. So that's why he plays queen to f3, trying to sidestep the rook on d8. But c5 I think is still a move that black can play, and he does it. And now after something like taking on c5, that would leave an isolated pawn on e4. So perhaps Hikaru, he can maybe play the move pawn to d5, but that would really weaken the e5 square. I'm not sure if Hikaru has much choice here, and it looks like he's coming to terms with that truth as well. He plays pawn to d5. Now this has weakened the e5 square and also has weakened the dark square diagonal for the bishop on g7 to look down at. Knight back to d7, hoping to route to e5, hitting the queen, but also protecting f7, which was hanging previously. The queen slides over to g3, and black has a completely dominant position here. Perhaps Nodirbek, he can start playing on the queen side, where he has a nice pawn majority. b4 is what he plays, attacking the knight. The a4 pawn is temporarily hanging though, but Hikaru takes on b4 without hesitation. Queen takes b4, redefends the pawn on a4. And now there's big pressure against b2. The only defender is this bishop on c1, stuck on its starting square. Hikaru trying to drum up some counterplay, plays knight to f4, perhaps hoping for a sacrifice in the future on h5 or g6. Knight takes b2, and now some liquidation on the queen side. Knight is able to take the pawn on a4 safely, I think, hitting the queen, and there the queen will have to slide away to a nice safe square. Queen to b4, perhaps hitting the knight and also moving back to safety. And that's exactly what Nodirbek plays. Queen to b4, now h4, trying to deflect the queen away from the defense of the knight on c3. Queen to e1, and now what will Nodirbek do? Knight to c4, great move by Nodirbek. He's uncovering the bishop on g7, and now there's tons of pressure against the knight on c3. Knight back to e2, but I think that's a mistake. There's a fork on e3. Nodirbek, he misses it though, brings the knight back to d6, where it's pressuring the center, hitting the e4 pawn, and now even though he had a missed opportunity there, black is doing very good. Rook to b1 attacks the queen, queen goes to c4, and now rook to f4. Hikaru scrambling to make the defense possible, and Nodirbek, he's managed to win the pawn on e4, but previously he had such a positionally dominant position, it looks like he might have let the advantage slip a little bit, and somehow, even with his form crumbling, Hikaru has managed to defend so tenaciously. And after the trade of the major pieces on e4, it looks like a draw is gonna happen, but what? Nodirbek, he blunders, I think, rook to b8, a check on the back rank. Oh my goodness, after bishop to f8, queen to h6, there's no way to defend the bishop on f8, and there's no checks that black has available. Nodirbek, he cannot believe that he let this game slip away, and Hikaru must be exhausted after such a game. And Nodirbek, he resigns. Good game to both the players. If you enjoyed this game and you want to see more, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.